Goofy Historians is the funnest place to learn about history. Or is it the funniest?
Welcome, everybody. This is a humorous history podcast, and we are the Goofy Historians. Today, we are going to finish up with Basilica, part 2, the final. We left off with Leo X, so go back and watch those videos. There's like a dozen or so of those. But before I go any further, I want to give a shout out to R.A. Scotti, I guess is her name. She wrote this book called Basilica, and it is basically the history of the church and how it was built. So most of the context, aside from other lectures and stuff that we've listened to, has been from that book. And it's a history book, but it is an amazing depiction of how St. Peter's was built. So check that book out. So Joseph is going to join us here soon. He was off to Alaska to study the Inuit tribe for our Native American show that we're doing later this year. Now, he might have just been on a cruise, but there might have been some Inuits. I don't know. So anyway, we left off, like I said, with Leo X. And after Leo X came Clement VII. And we've talked about Clement VII a number of times in our previous podcast, because we talked about Charles V and Francis I and the sack of Rome and all that. But we'll do that. We'll cover that again, because during that time, the sack of Rome was, as you can imagine, it was an apocalypse for that city. So there wasn't a lot of building going on right after that. We're also going to cover Michelangelo and how, as R.A. Scotti said, he waged art. I love that turn of phrase, because he really did. He was so angry all the time, and he just had so much passion, and God and death and hell and all that were real to him. And like when he painted The Last Temptation of Christ, I guess he showed, it's just really vivid. And after he became an architect, the body that was controlling the building of the Basilica was called the Fabricia, Fabbrica. And they were in control of paying everybody, buying the supplies, and that kind of thing. Now, Michelangelo wouldn't have that at all. He's like, no, I'm not answering to a committee. No way. So all the popes from maybe from Julius on just said, this is, the plan. Whatever Michelangelo says, don't question it. Just get to it. And even after he died, his plan still was just like embedded through like a bunch of popes. They just said, we got to stick to the plan. All the way until Paul III and his architect Bernini, just because the dome was so difficult to build, they had to kind of readjust it and that kind of thing. Anyway, so Bernini and Paul III as Pope kind of put the finishing touches on what Bramante and Julius had started. So it was almost done at that time. One of the crazy things that Bernini did was build this giant, they called it the machine. It kind of sets up the altar in the St. Peter's Basilica, and it's like 100 feet tall, and it's made of bronze. It's this giant monster of a thing. Everybody either hates it or loves it. It's just a crazy thing. So check that out. You can't miss it. It's right inside the main dome area. And then we're going to finish all the way up to the San Petrini, because they were such an interesting, it's like a hereditary guild that does maintenance on St. Peter's, and it's still active today. It's pretty crazy because if you think about it, their ancestors are the ones that did the original masonry and all that stuff, and they're still around today. It's like a hereditary guild that does the maintenance. They're like a mix between janitors and painters and architects. They're like on ropes, like sitting on statues' heads, cleaning all that stuff. So I thought that was fascinating. So those are some of the topics we're going to talk about, and Joseph, I'm sure, will be joining us here shortly. I don't know where Joseph is. He has not joined the call yet. Maybe he's still with the Inuits. Nobody really knows. We can't tell. We can't get a hold of him on the phone. He's probably watching Blue. So I will improvise. I guess I should start with Clement the Seventh. I actually know a lot about him. We did a whole video on him with Francis and the Battle of Pavia. It was during the time of Henry VIII. So Charles V and Francis I were waging war all over the Italian peninsula. And in one battle, Francis I got captured, the Battle of Pavia, and Charles took him captive. You can check out our other video for more details. What makes it interesting for the St. Peter's Basilica is that Clement VII had a choice to make. He could ally himself with the French, with Francis, or he could ally himself with Charles V, who's the Holy Roman Emperor. And he couldn't decide, and people were like, you got to decide because there's war going on. And everybody gives Clement a hard time because they're like, oh, well, he couldn't make a decision, and when he did make a decision, it was the wrong decision. But really, there was no right decision. So long story short, he did ally himself with Francis, which was a fatal mistake. So, and that caused the sack of Rome. You got to cut through the chase here, because yeah, there was another guy named Colonel that was like in Rome that hated Clement, that helped the Landscates. Basically, they were Protestant troops. They came over the Alps. They hadn't been paid, and they sacked Rome. And Rome, geez, they did so much damage to Rome. It was just unbelievable. It was worse than when, like, the barbarians, the Huns, all those tribes, barbarians conquered the Roman Empire in the 5th century, whatever. It was worse than that. It was worse than the Attila the Hun. Interestingly enough, there was the Pope at that time named Leo that rode out and turned Attila the Hun back. But anyway, not the Leo that we talked about. Anyway, so the sack of Rome was just devastating, and it was just awful, and Rome was destroyed. The Pope was hiding out in a castle. Francis was captured. They finally made a deal. Francis got out. They started the wars again, and everybody's like, no, you guys got to stop. This is crazy. So an aunt and a sister got involved, and they called it the Petticoat Truce or something like that, and the war stopped. So that was the sack of Rome, and it was it was Clement's fault. You know, he if you're the Pope, you shouldn't go against the Holy Roman Emperor. It doesn't seem, but you know what I was thinking is that Francis I and Clement were probably a lot similar to each other than he was with Charles. You know, they were both like high cultured, you know, like to talk about all kinds of crazy, you know, deep stuff. And Francis was probably a better, you know, a better dinner companion than Charles. Probably, he just probably flipped a coin and was like, yeah, you know what, I like Francis better. Anyway, so that's that. After Clement, it just went on. He actually he died soon after that. Michelangelo was the architect. Well, they brought him back from Florence, and to kind of like get back at the Protestant, at the Reformation movement, Michelangelo painted, I think it's called The Last Temptation of Christ, and it just shows, you know, all this like it's like Dante's Inferno kind of thing, you know, and you could just feel that Michelangelo was pissed. He was always criticizing the church. He wanted to reform the church. Well, he was critical of everybody, but he was pissed that the Protestant Reformation had came to that. So he waged art with his, you know, his creations. It was amazing. Like I mentioned before, the Fabricia was the body that controlled the supplies, the spending, and everything. And all through this, you know, they struggled to control what was going on because, like with Michelangelo, he was like, I don't want anything to do with these paper pushers, you know. Luckily, things got more rational after Michelangelo's death. May he rest in peace. The Pope the Pope Paul III and his architect Bernini, you can kind of look at those guys as Julius and Raphael, because Bernini was like a 25-year-old superstar, you know, and Paul was his patron, and they got things going. But anyway, I don't know where Joseph is. Maybe the Inuits captured him.
Hi, this is Joseph Whitmore, one of the goofy historians. Apparently, there is a wrinkle in the relativity of time. I thought we decided on 2 o'clock, but maybe 2 o'clock in California is 1 o'clock in New Mexico, or vice versa. Anywho, so I missed the recording on Clement, and David did his spiel, and I'm gonna catch up a little bit and talk about what I remember about Clement the Seventh, Pope Clement the Seventh, who was one of the Medici popes. And Clement the Seventh is basically considered a disaster as popes would go, right? Maybe it was a time in the history of Christianity, a time in the history of Catholicism, where maybe they could have used a Julius II and not a Clement the Seventh, because it was just a horrific time for the church. It was the time of nation building. This is where all the nations that we know today have come to be: France, Germany, Switzerland, Italy, you know, England. All of these countries are coming to recognize themselves as countries, right, as opposed to like part of some empire, right? It was also the time of the Protestant Reformation, right, where Germany, like I said, things were breaking apart. The Holy Roman Empire was breaking apart. It was breaking apart to all these little countries, and, you know, the Protestants were taking the north, the Catholics were taking the south, you know, and Suleyman the Magnificent of the Ottoman Empire was coming up the coast. The Crusades were long over, and no matter how long they tried, popes could never get another crusade going, right? They just couldn't, right? I mean, the Christians had lost 7 crusades, so it's like, God's on our side, why do we keep losing? So the crusades were over. There was one last bastion of the crusades in the Isle of Rhodes with the Hospitallers. finally, Suleyman took that, and that was basically the end of the crusading effort against the Muslims, right? The Christians were still crusading against each other a lot. Right? They were killing Christians, but not so much fighting the Muslims anymore. And they were coming up like through Eastern Europe, right? And nobody was stopping them, right? Because the Christians were all fighting among themselves. So it was, and also by this time the whole New World had opened up, right? I think it was actually the Borgia Pope who drew a line down South America and said the Portuguese gets this side of the line, and the Spanish get the other side of the line. But then the English go to, we're going to take the northern part. Then Magellan, tried to get around the world, showed that the world was huge. It opened up the spice road, China. So all of this was happening during poor Clement's time, right? And Clement really wanted to be a good pope, right? He really wanted to be a good pope. And he was intellectual, he was well educated. What's interesting is actually he was the illegitimate son of Lorenzo the Magnificent's brother, who was killed in the Papacy conspiracy, right? So he was illegitimate. And I don't know if it's still true, I hope not, but at that time, if you were illegitimate, you couldn't join the clergy. Like, oh my God, what level of hypocrisy is that, right? So he couldn't even become the Pope initially, right? But when his cousin, another Medici, right, who grew up, they all grew up in the same Medici house, right? These two cousins and Michelangelo, they all grew up in Lorenzo Medici's house in Florence. When Leo became Pope, right? He's Pope, right? He could do anything he wants, and he grew up with his buddy Clement, and he knew that Clement actually wanted to be Pope, right? So he says, "Okay, you're legitimate, because I'm Pope, I can make you legitimate." So once Clement becomes legitimate, in the eyes of God and the Church, he can become a priest, and he can become a cardinal, and he can become Pope. So he gets ready to do that, and he's been actually training to be Pope for a long time. Unlike the goofus Leo, right, who turned the Vatican into like a frat house, right? It's like Animal House, for the Vatican, right? That's what Leo did, right? Clement actually really wanted to be a good pope, but Leo had made such a mess of things, right? When they originally got the Medicis are a banking family, right? So he was thinking, they're bankers, for God's sake, right? They can get this whole financial thing in order, right? Because after Raphael, the church, everything, Raphael's a great artist, but he's not an administrator. The whole Vatican, St. Peter's Basilica became a sea that money was going through, right? Hire a banker, right? No. The only financial plan Leo had was to spend, right? I mean, and after he'd spent all the money that was in the coffers on parties and hunting, right? He borrowed money, and then after the money from like the Indians in the Native Americans in the New World, after all that gold coming in, after all that was exhausted, that was gone too, he started selling indulgences as fast as he could print things out. Which again really, really stimulated the Protestant Reformation. So he didn't come into a good situation. The Vatican, the Church was broke, right? There was the Protestant Reformation going on. There was the so it was the Protestants and the Catholics, but then the Catholics just could not stop bickering long enough to actually get together and make some type of coherent effort against the Protestant, right? They were all like trying to, carve up Italy, right? Because Italy itself had sort of disintegrated into all these little city-states, sort of like Greece was before, right? And so they were just open. Anybody could come in and grab a city-state if they had an army to do so. And that was like, the French, and the Spanish, and the even the English and the Normans. Everybody was coming down and grabbing a little part of Italy. And most of the popes were Italians, and they had this whole thing of getting Italy back for the Italians. So besides just being popes, they were Italians and they were Italian nationalists, right? So they were always, but they had, they actually had like one part that was called the Papal States, which was actually a worldly domain that was controlled by the popes, right? But it was never strong enough. It was right in the center, so it was a lot of strategic importance. The French and the Germans and everybody was like fighting this. So only way they could do, and the Swiss were always helping out the Pope, right? The Swiss guards, right? But it wasn't enough, and they were always in trouble. So, and Charles V, who owns the whole friggin' world almost, right? He still wants some more, right? Because he owns everything, but he doesn't own Rome, right? And he's the Holy Roman Emperor, right? So he thinks, well, I'm the Holy Roman Emperor. I should own Rome, and the Pope should be, eating out of my hand. That's how he saw things, right? Of course, the popes didn't want to do that. So initially, Clement goes, when you sign on to be pope, you're supposed to have signed this contract or something that you're going to get a crusade to go fight the Muslims, right? And so Clement goes, we can't be fighting Muslims when we're always like just fighting ourselves, right? So he like got together. There was like pictures of him talking to Francis I of France and Charles V, and he was sending embassies to England, and he's even like trying to get together with Luther, trying to get Christianity back together again as a rational human being should be able to do. You should be able to stop fighting each other if we're all going to follow the dictates of Christ, for God's sake, right? But it was way beyond that. Nobody was going to listen to reason, right? And the whole thing is just shot through with utter hypocrisy, right? And Clement's, not that pure himself. So, I mean, he had an illegitimate son, a couple of them, right, that he set up as leaders of Florence, right? And one of them was actually called El Moro because he's dark skinned, right? And they knew that Clement actually had a long-term relationship with a African lady. So I thought it was pretty cool. So he's pretty liberal, and he also agreed with Copernicus that the Earth was the center of the universe, right? So he was enlightened in that sense. He was up to date on the current scientific trends. He was an intellectual, but if he just let things go, Charles was going to come down and take Rome, right? And he already taken Naples, right? So he gets this war, like I think David describes it. There's this, Francis has a war with Charles V, and and then Francis loses because Francis is actually on the battlefield. He's actually fighting. Charles never gets to a battlefield, right? He's being goofy in Spain somewhere, but they do capture Francis. They take Francis to Spain. He has to stay in prison in Spain, and then his mom bails him out. But unfortunately, the bail happens to be his two kids. So he has to give his two sons to Charles V. And he actually, like, him and his son pass each other. They meet on this river, and like the two sons go over, and then Francis goes free. And then because that was the bail, that was along with like $15 million or something that we're going to pay to get Francis free. And so, and he has to like look at his sons as he's like delivering them over to Charles. But as soon as he gets over on the other side of the river to France, he goes, "No, I'm king again," and he starts the wars against Charles, right? Charles V, Charlie, in Spain, and it doesn't work. So at this point, the Pope goes, we really can't. Charlie is going to get way, way out of hand, right? He owns the New World. He owns, he owns Spain. He owns the, Germany and Austria, the lowlands. He owns all this. We're surrounded, and he owns, lots of northern Italy, and now he owns southern Italy. And so he said, we got to put a stop to Charles, right? We got to. Right? And then, so he gets like this, he actually calls it a holy league, right? It's a holy league against the Holy Roman Emperor, right? I don't know how they don't see the irony in that, right? But so the Holy League is like actually England, everybody who's not German, anything that's not part of the Holy Roman Empire, it becomes part of the Holy League against the Holy Roman Empire, right? Unfortunately, so so Charlie the Fifth, the Holy Roman Empire, he gets mad, so he's going to go, and he actually hires. Like he's like the most Catholic. He's like the Catholic of the. He wants the Holy Roman Empire is the Catholic Empire. He wants it to be a Catholic empire, right? So even though like he's fighting the Pope, it sounds weird, but it is weird. How do you think about that, right? But the Holy Roman Empire is fighting the Pope because he wants the Pope like to report to him, right? Because he's like the empire, right? And the Pope should just be like this little Gandhi, right? Who sits in his little palace and doesn't get involved in politics. So that's the story of poor Clement. So he gets this holy league of cologne. No, it's cognac or something, some holy league. And so Francis is in on it again because he's free, right? And he doesn't care about his son's in prison in Spain. He's like fighting this war, and then but they so in order to fight the war, right? This Holy Roman Empire hires all these pissed off Lutherans, right? Now remember, Luther, right, has been preaching. Right. I mean, Luther started off like all peaceful, saying, if you're a Christian, you can't fight, you can't be a warrior. You should be able, just like the old saints back in the first century, you should be thrown to the lion bin and, forgive your enemies, which was good when Luther first started off, and he was like underprivileged, right? He was he couldn't fight, right? But as soon as he became powerful, right, and he started preaching to the nobles of Germany, right, the magisterial Protestant Reformation, right? He goes, well, no, not really. All that stuff about peace and love, that's not really true. There is holy war, right? Because you have to fight. First, he liked the Muslims because they were attacking the Catholics, but now, like, they're fighting. I mean, the Muslims don't know the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant, right? So the Muslims are coming up and they're, oh my God, they're fighting Protestants too. So Hitler goes, no, not Hitler. Forget that, right? I mean, Luther says, well, no, there is holy war, right? And you have to fight and you have to kill, right? And he, not only Muslims, but also you have to kill Catholics. You have to fight Catholics, right? Because they're like the Antichrist. They're the whore of Babylon. He did these vicious things against Catholics and Jews and Muslims. He was like he went like berserk, right? And so, and he's and all these, and they have like the printing press. All these things are like flying off the printing press as fast as the indulgences are flying off the printing press. So, but unfortunately for Charles V, like the gold from the New World like dries up right at this point, right? So he gets all these pissed off Lutherans to come over the Alps to fight the Catholics, right? But the bad Catholics, not his Catholics, the Catholics on the side of the Pope, right? And so they all come over and they're fighting Francis, and they destroyed the Holy League, right? The Holy Roman Empire destroys the Holy League of the Pope, right? And here's all these pissed off, these Lutherans who actually believe that the Pope is the Antichrist and the world is going to come to an end. Like right now, as soon as we kill the Pope, Jesus is going to come back. And then like right at that point, like the money runs out from the New World and he can't pay them, right? So there's like these, 20,000-30,000 Lutherans right outside the city. And the only thing the Holy League has left is like 500 Swiss guards, dressed in these little cute uniforms, right? It doesn't go well. They kill all of the Swiss guards, except for like the last 20 Swiss guards surround the Pope and they get him to like the Castel d'Angelo, which used to be some tomb for some emperor. And they hide there, right? You can still go see that. It's one of the main attractions if you go to Rome. You see the Castillo di Sant'Angelo, right? So he's hiding in there with his little what's left of his retinue, and the rest of the city is sacked, and it's sacked for months, right? They take so I mean, this was the city of the Renaissance, right? This is where all the art, all the gold that was coming in from the indulgences, all of these palaces made by all these, these cardinals who were on the dole, right? They had millions of dollars of art and culture and you know roads, and everything was beautiful. Of course, they were just like parasites off the poor German peasants, but it was the epitome of the Renaissance. It was the peak of the Renaissance, and the Lutherans devastated the whole city, right? They raped nuns, right? They raped nuns on altars, right? They hung priests up by their testicles, right? Because these people weren't humans. They were the devil incarnate, right? According to Luther, and these weren't the most educated Lutherans, right? These were people who were coming over, and so they needed to get paid. They were torturing, they were killing, and then they weren't. It was like the body, the streets, the 80% of Rome of the population of Rome was destroyed. And there were dead bodies in the streets, which means there was plague, the water again, all the stuff the poor Catholics did to get the water system going and everything, and to get the roads clean, started archaeology again. That was all destroyed, and was all destroyed for a long time. Um, and they were getting the money because they were stealing the money from the churches. They were melting down. It's like the stories are awful. Like one of them, these they made like a priest to say mass to a donkey and give the host to the donkey, and when the priest wouldn't do it, they threw him off bridge with the rope, just holding on to his testicles. It's like this awful, awful, awful things happened. And finally, the only thing, and Francis was going, I can't get involved. I lost this war. So he goes back to France, and England, who was like part of this whole thing, goes, I'm done with it too. And Clement is talking to no, Francis goes back to France. He says, okay, if you can get Henry VIII, right, to sign on, right, because I'm broke, but Henry VIII has money and some troops. You get Henry VIII to sign on, and England and France, will come down and we'll rescue you from your prison, right, of St. Angelo, and then we'll all of us will go fight Charles again, right? And Henry VIII goes, well, I can do that, but first you got to sign this thing saying I can divorce the wife of Charles, the wife of Charles V, not the wife, the aunt. So Henry VIII is married to Catherine of Aragon, right? Who's like the aunt of Charles V, right? And the Pope's going, he's in a prison, and he's going, wow, man, if I like divorce Charles V's aunt from Henry VIII, right? Then he's really going to be pissed at me, and I'm really going to get in trouble. So he's like wavering and wavering if you do the divorce. And finally, but if he doesn't do the divorce, England's not going to come rescue him. But if he does get the divorce and England doesn't come anyways, and then Charles is going to come down, and he's going to burn me at the stake. So he doesn't know what to do. And finally, Henry VIII goes, "Forget it, I'm out. I'm done. I forget the Pope altogether." So he leaves, and so the Pope loses England, right? Which other to that time was a Catholic, just like the French and the German. They were Catholic, right? So England stops being Catholic. Northern Germany starts being Catholic. The Muslims are coming up and taking Budapest and moving into Hungary. They're going to move into Austria. And finally, at one point, they go, okay, so finally, the Pope melts down all of his jewels and gold and stuff that he has with him, and he pays the ransom to Charles so he can get out, right? And so Charles wins, and he goes, well, okay, and he becomes complete, which I think is the most disgusting thing about Clement. Once he loses, right? Once he pays a ransom, he becomes an absolute lapdog to Charles V, right? He says, "I'll come over and I'll crown you, Holy Roman Empire emperor, and you can have all the power, and I'll do whatever you say, right? And you can make all these cardinals, the Spanish cardinals, and and then." It was a disaster. It was a disaster for Catholicism, right? And you get all these new militant orders, right? It was like there's no more ever going to be any peace between the Catholics and the Protestants, or the Protestants, the Catholics, and the Muslims and the English. It was all a big disaster. But there was finally, after all that, there was like all of the it was all of, I think David mentioned it too. I forgot what it was called. It was the Peace of the Mothers or something, where all the mothers of all the emperors and kings get together and says, you guys should have peace, right? But it was really a peace where Charles won, right? England or Italy became basically another province of the Holy Roman Empire. Until probably until the 19th century. So Charles and after that hard line between Protestants and Catholics became more and more stringent. The next century was the century of the Holy Wars, right? The 30 Years' Wars in Spain, right? The Holy Wars in France, right? The 30-year war in Spain, like 50% of the population was destroyed, right? In fighting between Christians and Lutherans, right? It's horrific how much hatred there was between these groups. Until, of course, you get to, Napoleon and that, where, religion itself starts to become less and less meaningful to people. I think that's probably all I have to say. It was I think Clement VII would have been a really great pope if he had happened later, right, or even earlier, right, when there was still sort of peace in the empire, right? Maybe before the Crusades, right? He would have been like a Gregory the Great, right? He could have become a saint, right? Because I think he really was trying to bring peace and harmony to the Catholic world, and maybe even harmony between him and the Muslims and and other religions. Or if he came later, like today, I think he would have been a great pope, right? He would have been on the level of Francis, Pope Francis, like that. I think he was on that level, right? But he was just a point in time where that wasn't what was needed, right? It wasn't. He didn't have the correct skill sets. So too bad for the West, too bad for Catholicism, and too bad for Christianity overall. One thing, I'm not a Catholic, and I'm not even a Christian, so I'm looking at this just as an observer, and but still, things could have gone better for poor Clement and the Medici, because after that the House of Medici finally fell too. Anyway, so sorry, David, that I missed our talk, but we'll catch you next time.
So be sure and hit subscribe, go to our website, buy some merch. We'll have some great stuff later in the year. We're going to do a show on the Native Americans. All right, you guys, take it easy. Bye for now.
Goofy Historians is the funnest place to learn about history. Or is it the funniest? Does history repeat itself? Not really. But sometimes it kind of rhymes.